This is Van Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Ethan Bach for the first time. Welcome to the Fan Electric Ghost podcast.
Hey, what's up? I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on the show. Yeah, it's awesome to have new folks on the show, and we're gonna have a good show today. Um, Want to let people know before we start that we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. So if you use coupon code GHOST to get 1 month free premium subscription, again, we're a featured podcast on that platform. This episode will be on Newsly later tonight. So beyond that, we want to get into the fact that we've got your website up and we've got people who are probably just listening on audio. So we've got straight out of the coosnest.org. And for those of you, when the podcast is done, that will be fully clickable. So if people click on that, what will they find at your website?
They're gonna see a summary, not really summary, but just kind of gist of what's in my book that I just wrote, my memoir. And they'll get a glimpse of my Instagram, of some testimonials from beta readers, which are surprisingly glowing to me. But and this just some more info on my Kickstarter that I'm starting soon for it,
Mhm.
and I'm sure I'm missing something, but there's many little things on there.
Well, it's exciting when you start an enterprise. As a musician, we're always looking, to fund our next album. So we know about Kickstarter and all those fun crowdfunding type of apps. But here, the topic that we want to talk about tonight is getting lost in a Truman Show Delusion with Ethan Bach. That's the kind of the focus today, and we'll bring back your website. But yeah, we want to talk about like how this book came about. But maybe before that, you can talk about your life. You had a brain tumor at age 17, and it brought you some disabilities and issues and like all kinds of episodes that you want to talk about, known as like, I guess that you write about in your summary, the Truman Show Delusion. Maybe you can kind of step us back and however you want to approach that, and
Mm.
give us some background.
All right, so yeah, I got a brain tumor the first year I was going to college. I was going to the Art Institute of Portland, and I was doing film classes and stuff, and I just started bumping into people in the hallway, bumping into friends walking past them, and I eventually went to my doctor, and he wanted me to get an MRI like that next day, and so I did, and I got a call from him personally that same day, which is never a good sign if you're wondering about those medical things. And that's when he told me, and so a brain tumor happened, and obviously I'm here, so I didn't die from the brain tumor, but it was dangerous for a while. And but after the brain tumor, I had radiation treatment from that, and the
Mhm.
radiation treatment is really good for some things, but it's really bad in other ways because the radiation beams are shooting through your head at many different angles, and that's ruining your brain in general,
Oh,
besides the tumor. And the first psychosis I had was because the doctors gave me such a high dose of steroids to make the swelling in my head, my brain go
mhm.
down. And I just slowly started getting more irritable and just crying more, things like that. And then just finally one night, it just kind of, my brain snapped. And I was basically catatonic for the first like 12 hours of it, but in my head it was like all of this crazy stuff was happening around me, and it's just wild, you know. I can't. What else? What do you want to know about it? I guess.
Yeah, I can understand. I mean, just to give my background is like I had a level 3 sarcoma on my back,
Oh,
and
okay.
when I was like 27, and the doctors did like thought it was a cyst. I was having an operation. I was actually awake because it was on my spine, so they kept me awake.
Oh,
And
wow.
the guy thought it was a cyst, and then suddenly I hear him say, "Oh," this is a sarcoma.
Like during the
And then I'm like,
surgery?
yeah, in the middle of surgery. And I'm like, oh, great.
Oh,
And so then, like, I have one surgery, and then the next day, they call me like the next day after I got home. And they said, you got a level 3 sarcoma. We got to go back in. But since we already did a surgery, we give you like a week to recover from the first surgery, and then you're going right in for a massive cancer surgery, like a wider area. You're going to be immobilized for months, and so that was
mm,
a big trip. And they gave me steroids, and I had that kind of issue with the steroids, giving making me freak out, getting making me kind of irritable, and I had a max dose of my lifetime dose of radiation.
mm.
But it was
Wow.
going on my back, so I've got some limitations. I can't go out without a hat. I can't have my shirt off. But, I didn't have the problems that you had, so, I mean, I had that max dose going on my back, but I can imagine that
Yeah.
what that does to your brain. Plus the steroids, so it seems like they medically induced some issues for you.
Yeah, and I'll just backtrack a little bit and say that my tumor was a low grade. I think it was grade 1 or maybe 2, but it was located the deepest in the brain it could be by the brainstem. So
Mhm.
no doctors wanted to operate it or anything.
It's too risky.
Yeah.
It's always tricky, it makes you feel like you were 17 and I felt like, at 27, I felt like, if you're a 27-year-old, you're a 17-year-old, you don't think something like that's going to happen to you. You feel like you
Yeah.
got your life out there, that you're like nothing's going to happen. Right. So what
Mhm.
did that, 17, I can't imagine what that must have been like. Cause you're not even, you're still a teenager.
Yeah, I actually said like that exact sentence you were saying in my book, that you just no one thinks that's going to happen at that age, and somehow it did. And I was really lucky because I mean the my history with the brain tumor surgeries and stuff is kind of confusing, but I try and clear it up in my book. But at first, I just had a surgery to drain an extra cyst, and that relieved me of my symptoms. My symptoms, it was started with my arm, and then it kind of went to my hand, and it seemed that my hands was kind of interesting, stretched
Hmm.
out, and those kind of things. And so I got radiation. I forget where I was. I'm sorry, I was talking too
That's okay.
fast.
But I think you were talking about some of the symptoms like that you were starting to see.
Yeah, and so that happened with my arm, and at the same time, it kind of started happening with my right leg too, because
Hmm.
brain tumors affect you on the opposite side you have them on. So my right side is weak, my left side is
Yeah.
extra strong because that's the only thing I use mostly. And but anyway, at the time, I got a reckless driving ticket driving back from college because I just, I was driving with my right hand at the time as my dominant hand, but it's not anymore. And, it just started kind of shaking on the
Yeah.
wheel. And then my right foot was kind of shaking on the gas pedal. So I got a reckless driving ticket. And, but ended up getting cleared after the surgery because I went to court and I had a big brain tumor scar out of my head. So it was,
So they could tell. Yeah,
yeah.
it wasn't any kind of like reckless behavior. It's a medical. But did the police treat you like it was a medical, or did they think you were a drunk driver or like under the influence?
Well, when this happened, this was like the day before I went to my doctor, so I didn't even really know what was wrong. I was just kind of like something happened, and I don't know. I was driving erratically, I guess. I don't.
Yeah, it's a medical. I
So
mean, I hope they would treat it as a medical, but you never know how the police are going to react.
yeah, they ended up taking off the charges and being nice about it and everything, but at first it was a little rocky.
Yeah, it's difficult. So I mean, yeah, I remember being like not being able to drive for almost like a half a year after I got into my situation. Um, just because I couldn't, once I had my surgeries, I was like immobile. It had me
Mm.
on my stomach for months. I
Oh
couldn't
wow.
move. couldn't get out of bed. So it was like, and the people were wondering it like because it was like on my spine, we didn't know if it had actually affected my ability to walk because potentially you could lose
Oh
your ability
yeah.
to walk. And I
Yeah.
was able to I kind of projected because I was a mountain biker, and I was like, you know what? I don't care what they say. If I could lose my ability to walk or ride, I started to build a frame. Well, I started to buy parts from the computer. I was like tapping on my bed, and I would order parts for a brand new bike that I was going to build and recover go into recovery on this plan to build this bike and go back on the trail and bring myself back. And I actually
Nice.
did it. I did it. But I think you have to have a goal. So I'm wondering, did you have like
Yeah.
goals like when because I try to have a positive goal,
Mhm.
and not listen to the thing that I couldn't walk and I couldn't do this and couldn't do that. I try to say, well, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah. I mean, at first, after I had the first couple surgeries, it was like I woke up and it was perfectly better again. I was fine and dandy for like a year before some more symptoms came back. And yeah, I mean, at that time I was going to college. I ended up transferring to Central Washington University, and I was doing intramural sports and going to the gym and all that stuff. And that was, that felt great. But
Gotcha.
then symptoms came back, and the more kind of psychosis things happened, and that is kind of when my mind shifted a little bit. I did kind of get jealous for a little while of people just nonchalantly walking around and playing out in the park and stuff because I couldn't really do those things. But I've since changed my mindset, and I'm totally fine with it because I know that everybody's just going about their day doing their stuff, and if I didn't have the brain tumor happen, I'd be doing the same thing. So
Yeah.
you can't get mad at normal people for going around and doing those things.
Well, I did notice like when one thing that happened to me was like when they had the cancer and people found out it was a level 3, they were like, some people seem to act like they could catch it. And I actually had friends that either couldn't handle it and they just disappeared from my orbit. And I don't know if you
Wow.
ran into some people when you run into there's some people, there are friends that stick there and there are friends that don't. And
Hmm.
I ran into some people that maybe because, they were young and they didn't want to think about their own mortality. The way I
Yeah, that's a
started
good
to think
point.
about it is like seeing a fellow person in their age group have that made them feel uncomfortable to be around me because then they had to think about it. So I'm like, okay, fine, they
Yeah.
can't handle it. That's who they are. So I don't know if you ran into that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think most of my friends stuck around, but at the time, I had a new girlfriend that I went to college with at WSU because I transferred from Central to WSU for this girl, and some stuff happened, and I think part of the reason why she broke up with me is because she couldn't handle what we were just talking about, and
Mhm.
yeah, so yeah, I have experienced some of that.
Yeah, it's kind of it's you start to figure out, you have to kind of, yeah, I had to accept, a certain level of disability, a certain level of not being able to be what I was, and
Yeah,
then figure
it
out
took me
how my,
quite a while to figure that out.
yeah, then how do you survive in your new body? How do you actually get used to it and not be resentful and actually be positive? And that's a hard thing to get through. It's hard. Like if I go on the trail, I couldn't go, first ride, I couldn't even go a mile. I didn't go with anybody. I just wanted to make sure I could get back into it. And it was a long process because I wanted to get back to where I was doing 20 miles, doing 30 miles.
Hmm.
I couldn't even do a mile. And I'm
Yeah.
like, so like, wow. And I didn't give up. I just started building up. But it's like you had to kind of accept where you are and then figure out where you could go. Let's see, how far can I go? You know, what
Mhm.
can I actually still do? you know?
Yeah, one of my favorite pastimes when I'm, not writing and doing all these things is playing video games with some of my friends from high school still even. And I play with an Xbox controller, and that those take two hands normally. But I've somehow taught myself to play with just my left hand on the controller, moving all the buttons and stuff. And I don't know if you play video games or anything,
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of hard.
um, but yeah, whenever I tell people online, they ask me about it, and I tell them, and they always like, "What? We do that? Oh my gosh!" and stuff. So
You have to adapt. You have to
yeah.
relearn. I had to relearn how to play piano, and that's a big thing for me. Like I'm a
Oh
piano
wow.
player, I'm a synth player, and having to learn how to do it again. And it was kind of like, wow, it's like I'm not able to do what I was doing. I had to kind
Yeah.
of relearn how to play it and how to
Yeah.
deal with the way my
Exactly.
my coordination was. So I can get what you're saying because like you had to get that's like what you did on the Xbox, what I had to do with the keyboard. I had to do, I had to figure out how to do that again. And yeah, that people don't really realize, when people go through these kind of events in their life, some people don't understand the level of effort
Yeah.
it takes to get to where you wanna be again, or where people just they
Yeah.
don't take for granted. "Oh, I'm just playing Xbox,
Yes.
I'm playing PS5," and I'm like, they don't think about what it takes to do that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, at first, of course, I don't even remember because it was so long ago, 10 or 12 years ago, this happened, and it must have been really hard at first. But now it's like I pick up my controller and I'm just do 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 do, and it's weird how that works.
Yeah, you end up, like, figuring out like Hendrix, he was left-handed, so he restrung
Mm.
his guitar so it would actually work, like and he couldn't play it the regular way, he had to restring it, and then he actually learned how to
Oh,
play in a way that made him so unique, he still sounds unique today because he was
that's
able
cool.
because he restrung it, to be able to play it left-handed, and he ended up doing stuff that wasn't what your normal guitar player would do. He used his thumb to hold chords, to hold
Oh,
notes and be able to use his fingers at the same time, which is not something that's taught. He taught himself. So he came up with a new way because he was left-handed and people didn't want to show him how to do it right, so he figured it out. So I
that's
think that's the
cool. I
kind of
didn't know that.
creativity that, when you get motivated by like, "I
Mhm.
wanna do this," you go and you find a way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, in high school, this I mean, high school after high school and college, I was living back at home after the brain tumor and everything, and none of my friends were really still in town, and my house was way out in the boonies, kind of thing. So I was just by myself, and I'm just gonna play video games and figure it out somehow, and I did. So.
So I wanna get into one thing about but I'm not sure how, you came up with a term called psychosis journals and what you plan to do with them. So maybe you can talk about what is a psychosis journal and what are you gonna plan to do with it?
All right, so every time you go into these mental hospitals, facilities, institutions, whatever people want to call them, um, they usually tell you at the meetings and therapist meetings, and they tell you to make a journal to just write your feelings, and it'll help so much. You can even draw on it. They'll say draw pictures, and so I always did that, but I always only did it in the institution, and I always like when I got home and I ended up feeling better. It's always like, why do we even care about having a journal? I mean that's for me. I know journals help a lot of people, but so I should have brought them all in here, but I only brought one with me. And
Mhm.
I'm gonna either make a second book of short stories just based on the journal writings, or I want to scan them and put them on my Kickstarter or website, something like that. And I could read a random one from you for
Yeah,
you.
that's cool. Yeah, that's cool.
Um, I just want to make sure I'm not like saying something too weird. Oh, I have to be in purgatory. People can read my mind. I don't like it. I want to smoke to be an individual, not for any other reason. I was addicted. And my chest, I can feel the want for it, the smoking. Now my arm muscle is twitching, really convenient timing. So something must have happened in the institution where I thought it was like speaking to the arm muscle twitching. Yeah, but that was just one page because my writing is pretty horrible with my left hand and like big. But yeah, there's I have like a stack this big of journals.
I think that's really important because one of the things I think for all creative people, most of the musicians and authors I know and poets, we all diary and journal, and that's the singer songwriter core thing. I mean, before I even
Yeah,
became a songwriter, I had all these journals and diaries, and then they turned into poems. And then I realized a poem is different than a song. Like I couldn't take my poems and turn them into songs. I would take a poem and then change it to fit a song. Because once you
yeah,
start writing music, the poetry has its own kind of measure and it doesn't necessarily fit the beat that you wrote. So then
mm,
I started doing stream of consciousness. But the idea of recording, so I started, instead of doing journals, I started doing these 1 hour long stream of consciousness multi tracks where I just go on this mic and be on my keyboard and just let it go. It's the same as like just letting it go in a book, but you let it go on tape.
yeah, yeah,
And then you go back and you listen to it and you say, "Oh, I could use this and further develop it." But it kind of gives you this freedom to just kind of be in the moment. I think it's very good to kind of open your heart up and your mind up and your spirit to kind of just let it be without overthinking it.
yeah. I think originally when I started writing my book, like I started writing my book when I had was only halfway done with my psychoses. I still had a few psychoses after I started, um, and when I started writing it, I was thinking, what's the reasoning for me writing this? I just kind of want to get it out on the page, and it makes me feel good, and
Cathartic,
kind
cathartic.
of have a history of me kind of thing. But now it's all, of course, I want to help caregivers, I want to help sufferers, I want to help squash stigma.
Hmm.
Um, it there's just so many things that I know that my story could help so many people from so many different communities and marginalized communities that um I kind of like taking it upon myself to write my book so I could do this kind of thing.
Well, I think
Um,
it's interesting that a lot of people somehow sometimes think that creativity is meant for like, oh, you got to be a Stephen King, you got to be like Wordsworth, you got to be like William Blake. You can't like creativity is for all human beings. Like, and everything that each individual brings to the world is uniquely something that happened to them, and it's translatable. That's why singer-songwriters, in the punk movement, you think about that, like, they didn't have perfect pitch, but bands like The Clash and the Sex Pistols, they kinda connected, and the Ramones, because they were honest. They were just saying what they
mm,
felt, and then they found out there were kids that like, "I don't need them to sing like Marvin Gaye. I don't need them to sing like Diana Ross." If they're honest, it's like Kurt Cobain connected because
yeah,
you can be honest and be an artist. You don't have to be perfect. That actually not being perfect is actually shows the world and you get people to be relatable. So that's why I think it's like anybody that wants to sit down and start writing, it's valuable to humanity because
yes,
you're gonna have something that we're all humans, so you're gonna connect to somebody and you're gonna say
yeah,
something that somebody really wanted to say, but they were too scared to say it.
yeah. Because there's a lot of stories. I recently had a friend that like he's in the books in some capacity, but of course his name has changed and all that kind of stuff. But he was kind of scared about how he might look, and I was thinking to myself, there's so many like embarrassing and like horrible stories about things that I did that I should be the one that's scared or whatever, but I'm not really. I just I don't know. It's for a bigger purpose kind of thing.
Well, you tell the story. I mean, there's a lot of there's like people that there's a Rolling Stone journalist that was a Gonzo journalist, and he would go on. Sometimes he would write about his LSD trips, and people thought it was outrageous, right? But it's kind of like what a Jack Kerouac kind of go out on the road, kind of experience life, be out there on the edge. But it's like sometimes the world needs to see things that maybe they don't think they want to see, right?
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
there's certain standards, there's certain things that people have already done. What's the point of doing something that somebody's already done? Its point is actually telling a story that's unique. And a lot of times for artists or creators, it's the thing that's painful or embarrassing or you're scared of that's actually the most powerful thing that you could actually bring to the world. And so when you are willing to do
That's a good
that,
point.
I think it's a great service to the world.
Yes, that's a great point.
So the idea of suspicious minds, what is that? Maybe you can go into that.
So, Suspicious Minds, if anybody wants to know what Truman Show is, I mean, you can look it up on Google, but if you really want to know what it is, then you read the book called Suspicious Minds.
Hmm.
It is written by Joel Gold and Ian Gold. And they're brothers. One is a doctor and one is a professor. And the doctor brother, I think he worked at a New York hospital mental institution for years and years.
Hmm.
And he just started noticing these people coming into delusions, just thinking that cameras are following them, that there's actors around them, that their family, their closest people in their lives are not the closest people in their lives. They're really just paid actors to be there for the sake of money, kind of thing.
Hmm.
That's kind of how I saw it when I was cuckoo. So, um, but this book just talks about all their experiences and what their thoughts are on the delusion. They kind of coined the term the Truman Show Delusion because
Hmm.
they originally came out with the book and wrote articles about it and all that kind of stuff back in their mid 2000s, maybe. And Ian Gold, the professor brother, he's most likely going to write the forward for my book. I can't guarantee anything, but
Hmm.
he's reading it right now. He seems really nice, and he said he'd help out any way he can. So um, I'm
So
really excited for that.
how did you get tuned into that book? How did you find it? Did somebody recommend it or you just found it?
I well myself after my first psychosis. I think my mom even told me there was one time where we were eating dinner and we were just talking about my psychoses, and I was just like, it was kind of like that movie the Truman Show,
Hmm.
and then I guess I ended up looking it up. Not even looked it up in like 2021, like
Hmm.
10 years later, and I just found there's a whole book on it and everything. I was like, oh my god, and so I ordered it right away and got it, and then I emailed the brothers and said, can you do something to help out with my book? Or you guys are amazing in what you do and everything. So it's worked out so far.
That's interesting how you can find things, that you it's like conversation can trigger things, as a creative, like I get triggered into my art experiences from, doing podcasts, from talking to people. Like one of the reasons that people say, why do you podcast if you're a musician? You could be behind myself on my board, right? Why would I take time to do that? And what I say is like it's kind of like Jack Kerouac could be like, why do you go out on the road? Because you want to experience life and you need to talk to people. So a podcast, like, because of the pandemic, the podcast was a way for me to kind of go on this
Yeah.
virtual road and meet all these people, having all these conversations, and it actually feeds back into my creative process. And I was like, oh wow, I should actually think about things in this way. because every time you talk to somebody, you get a different perspective, a different worldview. And I think
Yeah.
that's very important. Like when I talk to writers, they're like, "Yeah, I want to get my worldview out there because I think I have something to share," you know.
Yeah.
And and I think that's why I like to talk to creative people because you get these points of view that you, if you're just in your narrow lane, you're just gonna keep on doing the same thing. Like if
Yeah.
you get out there, you get feedback, then you start to realize that you can kind of incorporate things that maybe you weren't thinking about, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to get political in any way, but I'm just saying that with the political world today, like we need more perspectives and people sharing their experiences, kind of stuff. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
that's my point exactly. Because like, there's certain people want to get into a regimen. They wanna say, "Well, you stay in your lane." And it's like, why? Most of the people I got inspired by are people that chose to not stay in their lane, like, as artists. They're willing to do something like Hendrix. Like,
Hmm.
I always mention him because he was willing to go in the studio and these recording engineers tell him, like, "You can't do feedback on record. They that's not good. You can't have that." And he's like, "It's going on the record." He pushed for it, and it's like he he pushed the envelope of what the guitar could be in the front. It didn't have to just be a
Yeah.
rhythm instrument, it could be in the front, and then we get the whole world of all these guitarists now is that he pushed his vision, even though people told him that's not the right way to do it, right? So being willing to stand for something that's not the standard and go outside the standard is usually, that's where you get innovation.
Yeah. I've been a big Redditor, using Reddit a lot over the last 10 years or so. And I've gone onto it a few times and I've asked questions of people trying to get ready for this book, trying to get ready for playing video games and having myself recorded with one hand. I thought maybe it would inspire people. And, it's like there's people with random comments like, oh, no one's going to care about that and stuff like that. And you just got to do your own thing and just, you know, it, it'll probably work out if you're motivated enough.
There's a lot of things going on where, like in social media, people like to clone. So I mean, you get like you. There's a good example. Like you do like a I don't know, a reel, and everybody's using the same 30 seconds of a song for the reel,
Yeah.
whether it's a cat or somebody throwing a water fight or a model. They're all using the same song just because they're hoping to get the same hits, right? But that's not very individual. They're just trying to get on a trend. So there's a
Yeah.
kind of a bullying in social media, like, oh, in order to be a hit, you've got to conform and use the same music, the same slides, the same fonts. It's like, and I'm very much an individualist in terms of being an
Mm.
artist. Like, I'm not going to go for that at all. I want to do whatever I want. you know, it's like, why not? And I want to talk to
Yeah.
people who are willing to do something different or show me something different because it's boring. The top 20 is boring to me. I talk to the people at
Yeah.
the bottom 500, the bottom 2,000 of the chart. I talk to emerging and independent minded artists or artists that are just breaking with their first book, right? Why do I don't, enough people talk to Stephen King. I don't need to talk to somebody like that because he's got enough press. I want to talk to somebody that's actually coming out that nobody's talked to. That's more
Yeah.
interesting for me.
And for me with like the music, I'm on Pandora Premium for the last however many years, and every time I go to the Hot Drop new music playlist, I hate it because most songs on there are just talking down on yourself and negative self talk. I search out the artists that maybe nobody's heard of, but they have songs that are more positive or
Mhm.
are about love or about just enjoying life or trying to motivate you to get better. Um, that's why one of my other little things I brought was one of my albums that I have for a song called "Learn to Fly" by Surfaces.
Mhm.
Surfaces. Um, and they're great because they embody everything that I just talked about. And at the end of my book, I have what I like to call my redemption playlist, um, which is just a collection of eclectic songs, like like I just talked about. They have to do with love, with motivation, with
Yeah,
positivity, and that "Learn to Fly" song though, that is, there's so many good lyrics in it that
kind of
are
like
just positive.
well, aspirational. You think about it, like I'm a child of the '70s. If you think about Stevie Wonder in the mid '70s, everything he did was very aspirational. He did
Mm.
all these albums that were very positive minded. They were talking about things in this kind of very that you don't really hear in popular music as much. He's like he had like these big albums that were talking about things that were more spiritual, things that were more beyond just just like yeah, something like a song can be silly, but he was trying to be
Yeah,
bigger than that. Talk about ideas that were bigger than that, but it was not like negative. They had rhythm. They made people dance. They made people happy. But he
I'm
was
kind
actually had a
of
message of
for some reason I'm
positive.
blanking, and I know his music. So, what are some of his
Yeah.
most popular
When
songs?
when someone like like love's in need of love today, which is a
Okay.
song that was used after 9/11. And it was
Mm,
actually really big in the '70s. It's actually a very aspirational song talking about how people should be like love each other and not hate each other. And it's in the mid '70s, and the Vietnam War is
yeah,
going on, all this stuff. And he's
yeah,
talking about, love is in need of love today. You need to send your love, like people were sending money to, people who overseas. It's like you need to send your love to like bring love back up. So he's pushing these very positive type of ideas. It's very
yeah,
like very spiritual.
yeah. Like the dream for me is to somehow get together the eclectic as hell artists that I put in my playlist and somehow make a big music festival of just positive music. Um,
Yeah, that's cool.
yeah,
That's a dream. I actually do festivals of independent bands that I don't think get needed attention. I call it the Peg Bedroom Producer Festival, and I try to have people who are pushing, musicians. And I've done it like 2 years in a row where I do 3 days of bands on this platform that I've interviewed, and they do like 30-minute sets. And it's about them
mm,
pushing their own music, and pushing their own ideas and not being forced to do covers. They're writing their own songs, and
yeah,
they're indie and they're independent and they're not part of big labels. And I push them because I think people need to hear something different. But yeah, I think it's just a positive attitude of taking your art and being willing to show the world, which is like what you're doing with your book.
yeah,
And like you're taking the idea of the Truman Show, and you're taking the Suspicious Minds, you're taking your own experiences, and you're showing the world your own interpretation of the things that happen to you, but also being informed by other things, which is what
yeah,
an artist does. That's what an author does.
yeah, yeah. I've really put up my all into this thing, and it's taken 2 years, two over 2 years to get to this point. I spent a year with a book coach named Kim O'Hara, and she's wonderful. And but even after I got done with her, I've had another family member who um, reads scripts in Hollywood and
Mhm.
or used to, I think. But she's been helping me edit the book even further to just make sure it's as crisp as possible and stuff. So shout out to Carrie.
And you were talking about earlier, like beta readers, and I've talked to a lot of authors that they really find their input valuable. Did you so how you got introduced to that beta reader group of
Yeah,
folks?
I didn't even know that beta readers was like a real thing, a term, until Kim told me. Kim, my book coach, and yeah, they did have some negative things, but I've changed those. That was like a year and a half ago. I've changed those things. I've added more things, but I had the testimonials up on my website, and I highlighted some parts that were just too good not to highlight. So, and
Yeah, that's always good.
yeah, so yeah, just crazy. If I wasn't doing what I was doing right now, I'd probably want to be a beta reader, really.
It's a cool thing, musicians, we kind of get our beta listeners on platforms like SoundCloud, because
Yeah,
we'll put something there and then see if it breaks with that audience, and then we'll push it out to the other platforms. So it's kind of our way to get feedback, and people there are pretty good. I mean, they'll go and do comments, give us very detailed comments on like certain sections of our songs, which is kind of like what a beta reader does for a book, where they will
yeah,
come in and they'll tell you at 2 minutes and 30 seconds they like this drop, or they like this melody, or they like the chorus, or they like the outro, they like that. It seems like a lot of them are musicians, and you get a
mm,
lot of good feedback, and that's always good that you get some people who are like listeners that actually know what you're trying to do,
yeah,
and like a
exactly.
reader, that reader who reads, that loves to read and wants to read something new. And that's really cool because, sometimes it's hard to find somebody that wants to read your book or read your script or read look at your film. Like people who are artists are always trying to find that group of people who are going to give them that good feedback, you know.
Yeah. Um, yeah, for me, I love having the experience of having the beta readers. They just found little things that I didn't even know that I had made mistakes. I thought, I would crossed every T, dotted every I, and I was on the third draft, and now I'm probably on draft 10 or 9 or something.
Yeah, I think you get too so close to something that you don't see it. And it's kind of like why musicians get producers and engineers, because like we're so close to our song. Then suddenly the engineer says, that would sound a lot better if you change the key, or you change it from a minor chord to a major chord or a diminished seventh. This will add this. And you're like, well, you could take it negatively, or
Mm-hmm.
you could kind of take it like George Martin did with the Beatles, right? 'Cause he came in and he started being like a teacher to them. He came in and started showing them different musical theory techniques, and then they started becoming better musicians. I think you become a better artist when you get really positive, decent feedback that actually is not negative. It's showing that somebody likes what you're doing and they want to help you. And they saying that, maybe you should look at it this way. Maybe you should take it this way. I think that's always helpful.
Yeah. Um, Ever since you mentioned the Beatles, I've just been smiling because uh, they're kind not like important to my story, but there's some scenes with the Beatles because in Truman Show Delusion, I thought I was meeting celebrities every
Mhm.
day, and the Beatles, I've always loved them for years, so they spoke to me pretty much, and they told me that things were happening, and I think that at the time, of course, it was very freaky and kind of scary, um, but it's pretty funny in the book the way I wrote it.
Mhm.
I just imagine all their voices saying those things again, and I don't know,
Well,
it's
they're
just an
so
interesting
inspirational.
aspect.
But the
Yeah.
Beatles are, even to me, like, I like all types of music, but the Beatles were just, inspirational because they brought back, well, they created the album format. Because what people might not know is music up until they started creating like albums, like Revolver and Let It Be and Sergeant
Mhm.
Pepper's. Those out they were albums where they was like you wouldn't just listen to the one song. Beatle
Yeah.
albums, you listen to the whole thing through.
Yeah.
Which, like, before that, in the late '50s and early '60s, most bands just did singles, and you didn't really have collections until they put all the singles and put them into an album, and it was kinda hit or miss. The Beatles
Okay.
started doing this idea that an album can be, even if it's not a concept album, it has like a feel where all these songs feel like they belong together and are saying something. They're telling a story. And they
Mm.
prompted, in the late 60s, late in 1970s, bands like Pink Floyd's and the Yeses and the Genesis, all these bands that start doing rock operas and
Yeah.
concepts and songs that were longer than a minute, like 7-minute songs, 8-minute
Yeah.
songs, 20-minute songs, just because like we can tell stories as artists,
Hmm.
that we don't just have to do love songs. We can actually create sound paintings that are these like
Mm.
visual experiences, like that you hear the song and you can see pictures, like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. They're like,
Yeah.
you hear that song and you kind of, Yellow Submarine. You're like, oh, I see colors. They're starting to show you that it can be multimedia, even though you're listening, that you actually start seeing something. And it's
Yeah.
supposed to. That's what they wanted to do.
Yeah. I didn't know that about the Beatles. That's pretty cool. And for some reason, the one thing I can think of right now is in my book. There was a man in a mental institution who started playing the song "Simple Man" by Leonard Skinner live,
Hmm.
not live, but acoustic on his guitar. He was a patient too, and for whatever reason, in the book I say, but I joined him and we just sang the whole song, and it was really. I mean, I was kind of loopy, but it was a cool experience. Um, and that's kind of a longer song if I remember right.
Yeah, yeah. Those are the period in the 70s where songs are longer, than they are today, unless you're listening to EDM. But like the whole idea is like you could tell stories. You get the Dylans, you get the Neil Youngs, you get the Beatles, the
Mm,
Pink Floyds.
yeah,
They tell stories, and people identify with these stories, and they have their own interpretation of the story. But I think what's good about it is it made you feel not that it's just like popular to be popular, but it's reaching into you like you're reading a book.
mm.
That's the way or you're watching a movie. That's the way those songs appeal to me. And as a songwriter, I like to get into things I think that have a certain depth. That it's not just like a throwaway, like how as much as that doggy in the window. But that's kind
The song
of like
that speaks
like
to
a
me the
throwaway.
most, like that has a story and it's emotional. It honestly makes me cry probably half the times I hear it, but I love it. Is "I Hung My Head" by Johnny Cash. It's
That's a very good.
about, oh yeah, you know it. So yeah, I love that song. And
Johnny's brilliant. I love everything he did. I have it like my taste is very eclectic, but like he's like one of the core American songwriters. Like with Dylan and and you get everybody knows like Elvis, but and the Motown guys, but they actually he had this outlaw country. He's the definition, but he's
yeah,
also
the Man in
Americana.
Black.
Yeah, he's just Americana, and it's the fact that he was willing to do Folsom Prison Blues and actually go to prison,
Yeah.
right? That he identified with people that had a hard time. That he could, even though he's a millionaire at the time he was, people
Hmm.
felt that he was authentic. When he went to Folsom and San Quentin, those prisoners didn't feel he was faking. They felt he was authentic. That he
Yeah.
wasn't a lie. He wasn't trying to do an act. He's like, he felt comfortable.
Yeah, those live recordings, you can really tell those inmates get into it.
Yeah, it's not a joke. They feel they had a kind of kindred spirit. They felt that he understood them, and he did. Because Johnny had a lot of problems. He had a
Yeah.
lot of issues, and he
Hmm.
was able to kind of tell that story, and people felt it. And I think that's as an artist and a writer, when you can take your experience and connect, and it's a service. What you're doing with what happened to you is being able to connect and have everybody feel that like there's nothing wrong with me telling this story.
Hmm.
This is what happened, right? And I'm not going to
Yeah.
be worried about it. And it might be, you know, shocking, or it might have different parts of it that you're kind of, oh wow. But it's like that is life. Life
Hmm.
is not always, you know, a nice neat box. That is very presentable.
Yeah.
You know,
As I've ramped up my like marketing sort of with my book and stuff, The dialogue has kind of been opened up with me and my family a little bit more so than ever before on mental health and drugs and stuff. And it really feels pretty good to talk with them openly like that. Um, More so than like ever before. So yeah.
So what were some of the scariest or funniest moments, and maybe you want to take one at a time, but or if they're combination that happened looking back?
Um, I feel like there's too many funny moments to choose, but for scary moments, that the first 12 hours that talked about when I was kind of catatonic in my bed,
Hmm.
that was probably the scariest. Because I just believe so many things were happening towards the end of the night. I thought there were people coming in the house with chainsaws and killing my family outside my door, and my dog was dying outside my door by a chainsaw. And I mean, I don't like the sound of chainsaws now. Um, but there's so much more to go with that than just that part. But that was the scariest thing. I'll just say this one funny part was the first famous person I thought I met was. I'll tell the story. I was in an institution. I was going to the Commons to read a magazine, and I sat on the couch. There was a man across from me, also on the couch reading a magazine. The magazine was kind of like in front of his face, and it was Sports Illustrated. I didn't think anything of it. And then I glanced up, and I could see his face behind it, and to me, it was Adrian Peterson, the NFL running back. And
Wow.
he was African American, had a bald head. That's it. The delusions were kind of like they were real people that maybe sort of looked like the actor, but it wasn't an actor at all. It was just a regular person that maybe sort of had a similarity here or there.
Hmm.
Um, but so he's sitting there reading his magazine, and I'm like, "Oh my god, are you Adrian Peterson?" And he was like, "What?" And then in my mind, I'm like, "Oh my god, I said the wrong line. I said the wrong line. I messed up. I have to redo another take or something." So I ran out of the room. That's my book in a nutshell. Are those two things?
No, but I think it's good to have people know the reality of what your situation was, so they can feel what happened. Because life in itself, people write fiction, but there's a lot of things in life that happen to people that that people are scared to document, and it actually can give a lot of information to people, let people know, like somebody might have similar experiences and is too scared to tell anybody about it. And so I
Yeah,
think I think that's very, very useful, because the therapeutic value of like being an artist is that you put something out and it's actually, accessible, and people, even though you wrote a song about your feelings, everybody has those feelings, or everybody maybe had an experience and maybe you didn't think they did, but people have similar experiences. But you might think
yeah,
it's, oh, this is only me and I'm the only one, and that's not true.
yeah. When I read Suspicious Minds, I was just blown away that many people have had the Truman Show Delusion, and that inspired me to write my book partly. And yeah, just amazing that for a long time while I was kind of half going through the psychosis and a little bit after, I was just thinking like no one else is going through this. I'm alone, and I was kind of going down drinking and stuff like that. But reading that book and seeing that this is so prevalent, especially now with more media and
Yeah.
cameras, reality shows and stuff, and it. I kind of wish that Ian Gold and his brother would write a sequel because they look at it more from the doctor perspective,
Hmm.
and I'm sure there's more people in the U.S. that have it now than there used to be. So
I think it's really great that you came on the podcast because the podcast format, going forward, is a really good format to find other people like that need to know about it, or forums where you can talk about it. So getting out here in this type of social media format where it's not just, we're not clickbait,
Mm.
we're doing something for like an hour. Whereas having an in-depth discussion, we're getting into it, and we're not trying to push this or that. We're just getting into the heart of, you're an author, you're telling your story, and we're not trying to soundbite it. So that when you get out there into the world, you can find other people who want to talk, and you'll find
Yeah.
that there's a lot of people that you might be able to connect with, like other people that are doing podcasts you might not even realize, but doing this podcast, people out in the world might find it, and they might contact you and say, hey, you should come on my podcast, or I'll come on, talk to you, or you'll find opportunities. And that's kind of what the world's about, is connecting here on the web, is finding a way to connect to like-minded people no matter where they are.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That other people could just find me that have had Truman Show Delusion from this podcast, this exact podcast, and we could connect that way. And yeah, that's amazing.
Well, we'll do our best to get it to our audiences so that you get, people checking out your website. Because, if we go mention that again, it's straight out of the cuckoo's nest.org. That'll be fully clickable. And
And make sure it's straight, as in straight jacket. So
mhm,
there's no GHT, or
yeah,
it's just AIT.
but they'll be able to actually click that, and it'll actually go
Oh,
right.
okay, okay.
So it's like right now for the people on audio, you spell it out, it's STRAIT out, OUTTA, the cuckoo's nest.org.
Yep.
Yeah, that's going to be a benefit, I think, to connect with other people, because that's the whole point of doing the podcast, is to make sure that when we introduce an author, or we introduce somebody who's like a thinker, or somebody who's got something to say, that people will go and follow up and actually click through on the link, and check out what you've got to offer. So we're happy that your book is what's the timeline for your book, for it coming out?
Timeline.
Yeah.
Well, I'm starting the Kickstarter this Friday actually, and it's going to run until mid October. And after the Kickstarter's over, I actually just got today um, a verbal text offer from a traditional publisher, but it's not nothing signed or anything. So
That's
preemptively, it could come out like January 2024.
that's cool. Well, it's something to look forward to, and let us know when it comes out. We could have a follow up for your book release. We tend to, on our program over the years, we've had many people come on. Where, like, this episode was actually episode 944. So we have people come back. That's how we have so many episodes.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. If you ever want
I
to do
mean,
that,
and
you
he's,
can
I
come
mean,
back.
it's so relaxed, and you seem like a cool guy, so I can see why.
Yeah, we just want to let people know what's out there, and check this out. And thank you again for being on the podcast. I think it was a really cool discussion, and I think when your book comes out, it will be awesome if people check out in the Kickstarter and support you. We hope we get people to do that. We always ask people to support the artists that we talk to. So thank you again for being on the Fam Electric Ghost podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
No problem. Have a good night. This hang tight a little bit in the green room, but thank you again for being on the show.
All right.